Okay, welcome back. This is a continuation of our mini lectures for hallucinogens. And in this lecture, I'll be talking about the way that the different types of hallucinogens are administered, how they work in the brain, and what their acute effects are, how they affect the user. So this is kind of an overview of the different ways that the hallucinogens can be consumed. So you'll see from this chart that um, and my shared screen is preventing me from seeing some of the labels, so bear with me here. So LSD, DXM, ketamine, and PCP can all be swallowed as pills or tablets. LSD and all of those, I mean, really, I don't have to go through this whole chart, but you can see that the PCP, for example, has many different ways that it can be consumed versus DMT really is kind of only two ways. Same with, um, what is this here? Psilocybin. So the substances themselves are pretty varied in terms of how the user can get the drug into their body. The pharmacology. So how do these drugs work on the body? So the classic hallucinogens that we talked about, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, ayahuasca, and DMT, are serotonin agonists at very specific serotonin receptors. So they increase the bioavailability of serotonin in the brain. The exact mechanism for how this then translates into a hallucinogenic experience is unknown. Because we also know that SSRIs or other drugs that increase serotonin in the brain don't necessarily come with hallucinogenic effects. Like people aren't tripping off of their antidepressants. So, what it is about these particular compounds and the activity of serotonin there is still really unclear from the science and the neuroscience literature. But we do think it has something to do with the serotonin quality to the chemical compounds. The belladonna alkaloids are acetylcholine inhibitors, so they prevent the activation of acetylcholine receptors in the brain. Again, not sure how that leads to hallucinations, but it does. A same thing for the rest of these. So the dissociative anesthetics, PCP and ketamine, but then also DXM works as a glutamate antagonist, so preventing glutamate from functioning in the brain. And then salvia uniquely is a kappa opioid agonist. So it activates opioid receptors in the brain, but only the kappa opioid receptors. And if you'll remember from our lecture on opioids, this is the opioid receptor that's associated with a negative subjective experience, like an unpleasant experience, and that's the one that salvia activates. But again, not clear how any of this translates to hallucinogens. I wish we had more information, but it's a really unique subjective experience of altered perception of reality that is hard to pin down and connect the user experience to a biological mechanism in the brain. But we do know some things about the effects of these substances per the way people describe them, and also through research and sort of more formal and systematic observation of the impact of these substances. So I mentioned in the intro lecture that LSD is a very potent compound. And so we measure the dosage in micrograms. This is not milligrams, this is micrograms. And so at 25 to 50 micrograms, this is like a drop. You get an effect that lasts 4 to 6 hours. It begins with dilated pupils, and then leads to more subjective. So generally for LSD, the physiological symptoms happen first, and then the more subjective mental hallucinogenic effects kick in after. And so you see this restlessness, this heightened awareness, increased rapport or feeling comfortable around others, emotional clarity, feeling more connected to your emotions, and relaxation. At a medium level dose, 75 to 150 micrograms, you get an 8 to 12 hour effect on the individual. Again, those physiological symptoms starting first, so some dizziness, nausea, increased heart rate, increased body temperature, blood pressure, and then you get in the hallucinogenic effects, so feeling like time is slowed down. So an 8 to 12 hour experience where you also feel like it's longer than that. Colorful visual hallucinations, and synesthesia, which is the sometimes called seeing sounds and hearing colors. It's when your perceptions get crossed in the in your subjective experience. So instead of looking at a piece of paper and just visually seeing what's on the paper, maybe someone can hear it. They have the perception of hearing the shapes on the paper. Or someone can sometimes taste a color. So and it's the sensation of a different sense, one of your five senses, being activated by something that normally doesn't activate that. And then 200 to 500 micrograms is you've got a 15 to 20 hour long experience, and it's all of the above that happen, plus the experience of a disconnection or a disintegration of the body and the mind. And some people call this total ego death, where you lose a sense of yourself as a person in a body, and you experience just a sense of self detached from the body. Um, it's hard to describe. The people who have tried to explain this to scientists have a hard time putting it into words, and so it's hard just based on the written descriptions to even clarify what this means. But my sense is it's what happens with um, even sometimes people experience this with really intense meditation. And if anyone practices yoga, you might have experienced this in Shavasana, which is called corpse pose. And it's the pose where you're just laying on the floor with your eyes closed and you're mindfully breathing. And the sensation can sometimes occur to someone that the body has kind of melted away and you are just your mental consciousness, free from your body. Um, and that's something that people who use LSD regularly report experiencing while they're on the substance. Psilocybin and DMT, I'll talk about these separately, but psilocybin is, people describe it as a shorter or milder acid-like experience. So basically, it's like similar to LSD, but for a shorter period of time and not as intense, except for the visual hallucinations. So people say that the difference is that psilocybin produces stronger visual hallucinations in these very colorful kaleidoscopic patterns. So seeing more colors, more patterns that aren't there, versus with LSD, the experience is more of time or maybe distortions in like that synesthesia effect. Psilocybin's more likely to come with straight up seeing colors and patterns that aren't there. At a low dose for psilocybin, people report feeling relaxed. Again, having the physical perception, visual perception changes. And then at high dose, there's more physical sensation changes in the way things feel, some experience of nausea, maybe some anxiety. But then people also report at high doses mystical or spiritual experiences. And there's been some interesting research that shows that at these very high doses, it's pretty predictable, actually, that people will experience some kind of spiritual event. And it's like, I don't remember the exact details of the study, but they gave everyone this high dose of psilocybin, and everyone reported having a spiritual revelation and a mystical connection with like a god or a higher power. And so that's something that's being studied now as to like, why is this such a predictable experience from high doses of this hallucinogen, when it's such a subjective experience otherwise. Like we can say that, psilocybin comes with this, experience of visual patterns, right? How like kaleidoscopic images, but what one person sees, maybe some person sees this kind of Aztec looking design in like blue and orange colors, and somebody else sees something that's more like a paisley pattern in purple and pinks, right? Like we can't predict what someone is going to see. We just know that they will see something. But it looks like this spiritual or mystical experience is a little bit more predictable, and it's something that people tend to experience at these very high doses. So that's something that's under investigation. It's unclear again where that comes from or how that works in the brain. DMT is, you'll remember from my first lecture called the Businessman Special. This is the 1 hour short acting hallucinogen. It is shorter, it's also more intense acid-like experience. So it's a substance that causes a very intense hallucinogenic experience for a very short amount of time. It has a very rapid onset, so the peak hallucinations occur after approximately 10 or 15 minutes of taking the substance. So it's like, whereas LSD is something that lasts for 4 to 6 hours, and the peak occurs somewhere in the middle of there. DMT, it's like you're kind of slammed into this hallucinogenic experience. And because of that, people report and people have observed having anxiety attacks more frequently with this substance. The other hallucinogens we've been talking about are belladonna and the salvia divinorum. So belladonna, there's kind of two types of experiences that are observed among people who take these belladonna substances. The first is this kind of wild delirium, like the person is disoriented, they're experiencing hallucinations, and they're loud about it, they're irritable, it's like they're just really kind of out of their mind. And they're out of their mind and they're in your face about it. Versus the second type, which is like this kind of more of a stupor, and like a mutteringly delirious kind of kept to yourself kind of talking nonsense kind of experience. But both of these come with this experience of thirst, blurred or loss of vision, and also when the belladonna plant is smoked, it can paralyze the respiratory system, which is very dangerous. And then I mentioned Salvia divinorum before in the intro thread as having very intense kind of cartoonish like visual hallucinations and a dissociative effect. So feeling disconnected from reality and just feeling like people describe feeling like transported to another reality. And I posted a video of some people describing their experiences on salvia, and you can check that out. But a lot of people describe it as being very scary. And I mentioned in the intro, or no, at the beginning of this lecture, that salvia acts on the kappa opioid receptor. And so I'm curious about why this substance would be associated with these negative experiences based on your knowledge of how these different opioid receptors work. So that's your lecture question for this module. Why is it that salvia is associated with negative hallucinogenic experiences? And the hint is use your knowledge of the different opioid receptor sites and how they work. Dissociative anesthetics, so this is PCP and ketamine, and they are similar, but there's important differences. So PCP really kind of runs the gamut. You're getting this kind of mixed effect where it feels like the person is drunk, like they are high on amphetamines, and like they're on a hallucinogen. So you get this like uncoordinated body movements like a drunk person, but this like intense surge of energy like someone on amphetamine, and then like this total disconnection from reality like someone on a hallucinogen, all rolled into one. The people high on PCP describe thinking paranoid, like kind of manic excitement level, experiencing rage and irritability, combined with the numbing anesthetic effect of PCP. And then also this level of dissociation, being out of touch with reality and having this unpredictable behavior. So people with PCP often end up in the emergency room or in trouble with police. And there's plenty of videos that you can watch. I don't like linking to them because I think that a lot of times the people who end up in those videos are people who are marginalized. They're either like poor people or they're people of color. And so I just don't think it's a like good look. But you can find some examples of what PCP looks like on the internet. To be clear, not all the people who are using PCP are poor people or people of color. It's just those tend to be the only folks end up on the internet for some reason. So kind of a nasty substance, has a nasty reputation, and rightfully so. Ketamine is a little less ragey than PCP, but still a very intense experience. This kind of drunken-like state, this kind of spacey, uncoordinated body movements, but more social, so less irritable, less ragey, and more kind of in that kind of drunk way of being more talkative, more connected to other people. At higher doses, people report this like intense dissociative experience with ketamine, which is sometimes called a K-hole, but it describes like people feeling like they're out of their body or like near-death experiences. So like really feeling disconnected from reality, and in some kind of alternate space. And also ketamine at really high doses can depress someone's breathing, which can be very dangerous. Salvia and DXM. So salvia, we talked about this a moment ago. I think it must have ended up in this section twice. But it's the second most potent hallucinogen. And it creates this really unique experience, unlike most of the other hallucinogens. And it's very fast acting, very intense hallucinations, and alters perception of times. But the experience only lasts a few minutes, but the people report that their sense of time is so distorted that they feel like they have lived multiple lifetimes while on the drug, and they come out of the experience 2 minutes later and their friends are like, you've been out for 2 minutes, but that person feels like they have lived literally multiple lives throughout that time. So a very, very strong distortion in the perception of time for salvia. And again, this tends to be a kind of scary experience. Most people report feeling unpleasant effects from this. And so that's your lecture question for this week. Why might that be based on our knowledge of opioid receptors? And then DXM, or dextromorphan, this is the cough syrup hallucinogen. It creates this really dissociative state, altered sense of reality, ranging from mild to really intense, and again, potentially toxic. So at high doses can be associated with confusion or disorientation, increased body temperature, blood pressure, nausea, vomiting, and then, like I mentioned before, increased toxicity due to other components. I think maybe this slide repeated twice, so apologies for that, but hopefully this clarified if you were confused from the last one. So there are some unique factors related to psychology about hallucinations and hallucinogens. One is that people who take hallucinogens can experience bad trips. Sometimes a hallucinogen experience is called a trip, like taking a trip. And they report feeling really unpleasant, really uncomfortable with what is happening to them, really not liking what they're seeing. Sometimes people just, they call it freaking out on acid or LSD or shrooms or psilocybin or whatever it is they've taken. And while most of these substances, unless I said otherwise, are generally non-toxic, having a bad trip and freaking out can be dangerous because it can cause the person to try to escape the experience, and their behavior can become unpredictable. And so they can end up hurting themselves accidentally. There were several examples of this in the Netherlands, actually, where psychedelic mushrooms are legal. And there were tourists who were coming and using them, and several of them ended up dead from running into traffic or jumping off a bridge. Some really tragic cases where they ended up having a bad experience and their behavior became unpredictable. Um, so they changed the law. I think now you have to be a citizen of the Netherlands in order to partake in the legal psychedelic mushrooms. You cannot use them if you're a foreigner. Um, so whether or not someone has a good or a bad experience on hallucinogens really depends on the setting that they're in, the company that they're taking the substance with, and their own mental well-being. So whether or not they are in a good place mentally going into the experience. And generally, if someone is in an open space in nature versus a confined or closed off space in a city or in a house, even, that's going to affect the experience. Being around people that the person trusts, that they feel safe with, that are positive people who they are reassuring and comforting to them, that's going to increase the likelihood of a good experience. And then also, if the user is feeling well mentally, like they're not feeling anxious from other things in their life, they're not feeling depressed already, then going into the hallucinogen experience is going to be, they're less likely to have a bad trip. Flashbacks are another unique ex- phenomenon related to hallucinogens. So this is the experience, the reoccurring of hallucinogen symptoms um, long after the substance has left the body. So it's almost like a memory of the experience that's happening in real time. So I guess you could call, maybe describe it kind of like a deja vu, like the distorted sense of time, the distorted sense of reality, the experience of visual hallucinations or changes in perception. It can happen again long after the substance has left the body for like any amount of time. It can happen to anyone, even first time users. So someone could take LSD once and experience a flashback from that experience. And it's completely unpredictable. Like you cannot determine when someone is going to have a flashback after they've used the substance. But we can say it is more likely in like a dark room, so like before going to bed, tends to be a time when people experience flashbacks. But again, you can't say why someone experiences it on one night and not the other. So really, kind of this unique, unpredictable um, phenomenon that can happen even just after one time use. We also know that early use of hallucinogens can be linked to psychotic disorders later, in the same way that early use of marijuana can. So that's a unique psychological consideration. Um, Ketamine is a drug because of its anesthetic properties. It's that kind of drunken-like state that it creates in the user. It has been associated with sexual assault and as a chemical assisted sexual assault. Um, and there are also, for some of the substances I mentioned before, including ketamine, there are some potential therapeutic values to these drugs. So they're currently being investigated. Ketamine, MDMA, which I mentioned in the other lecture, and psilocybin are all currently being investigated for their potential use in therapy treatments. Considering particular issues associated with treating someone who has been actively using hallucinogens. One element is how to help someone who's experiencing a bad trip. So, really, you cannot stop the experience of hallucinations at will. So, if someone is under the influence of hallucinogens and wants to stop hallucinating, they cannot do that on their own without some kind of substance. And so, someone who is feeling trapped or feeling like they're having a bad experience, really the only way to help them is without drugs, other drugs, is to speak to them calmly, reassure them that they're safe, try to get them into like a more comfortable setting. Again, those factors I mentioned a moment ago can help someone kind of talk them down from that bad place, but it's not going to stop their hallucination experience. Antipsychotics can do that. So it can, for someone who has experienced a psychotic break because of a hallucinogen, they can take antipsychotics and that will help with that. And then there's some anecdotal evidence that Xanax, which acts as a serotonin antagonist, may stop hallucinations or disassociation immediately. So sometimes people are using that as like a uh, I can't think of the word, but just as a fail safe or like a last resort. Like I'm not having a good time. I have this like um, pill that I can take that'll stop me from experiencing this anymore. But again, that's anecdotal and it's coming from recreational users. Much more research is needed into whether or not that's true for most people, or that there's research evidence to support that.